Horror has been having a bit of a moment as of late.
Wouldst thou like the taste of butter, a pretty dress? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
A number of films have achieved a level of success unimaginable for a genre often derided as, at best, low-art schlock.
Violent but entertaining, and movies that are gruesome and despicable. There is a difference between a horror movie and a freak show.
And at worst, exploitative and harmful. But how did we get here? It's been a long and winding road for horror in cinema. Hello and welcome to Front Row Cinema Club, where today I'll be talking about the history of horror, decade by decade. Let's start at the start. The first cinemas showing films for an admission fee date back to the 1890s. Films were simple affairs then, with a generally static camera positioned in front of a single scene. The rules and language of the movies had yet to be written, and all conventions that we know as standard today did not yet exist. Cinema was in its infancy, and in fact, many of the films we now look back on from the early days and classify as horror could perhaps better be described as melodrama with horrific or grotesque elements. Themes of the supernatural, the gothic, and of horror had been wildly popular during the 1800s, with novels such as Dracula and Frankenstein capturing the public's imagination. Spiritualism, the belief that the living can communicate with the dead, exploded in popularity. And a series of infamous murder cases, including Jack the Ripper and the Borden killings, intrigued and repulsed the newspaper-reading public. It was only natural then that the horrific themes people so morbidly sought out in life would make their way to the artificial world of the screen. Georges Méliès, a Parisian theatre owner and a lover of magic and spectacle, began producing short films in 1896. His film, A Terrible Night, portrays a man doing battle with a gigantic bug which will not allow him to sleep. Just imagine where we'd be from this point here to about 50 years in the future. His first, what we might consider true horror film, came in 1897. The haunted castle features spirits, a skeleton, and even Satan himself. In 1910, the first version of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was brought to the screen by Thomas Edison's company, Edison Studios. The film runs for nearly 15 minutes and features a monster very different from the one we commonly picture. 2 years later, Frankenstein has discovered the mystery of life. Quite a big jump there. I don't remember what I learnt in the first 2 years of college except how to vomit neatly into a pint glass. The impressive creation scene, devoid of the now standard electrodes and lightning strikes, concludes with a sinister hand reaching out from behind a door, an image we see repeated again and again in later films. At the end of the film, the monster simply vanishes due to the love of Dr. Frankenstein for his new wife, Elizabeth. Convenient, no further explanation needed. 2 years later, the first adaptation of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was brought to the screen by the Tannhauser Company. In Germany, 1913 brought us Paul Wegener's The Student of Prague, and in 1915, Der Golem, now a lost film but with a surviving remake from 1920. Also in 1920, Robert Vine directed The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Featuring a surprise twist ending, the story is told through the artistic medium of expressionism, focusing on a subjective perception of reality. Each set is carefully constructed from odd angles and painted shadows. The story concerns a young man, Francis, who meets a doctor, Caligari, at a fair. Caligari is travelling with a sideshow act somnambulist named Césaire, played by later Hollywood star Conrad Veidt. The doctor claims that Césaire is able to see into the future. He also seems to be murdering various people about the town, though perhaps things are not exactly as they seem. The character of Caligari seems to represent the danger of uncontrolled authority in society, The two writers of the film, Karl Mayer and Hans Janowitz, were both pacifists who had greatly been affected by the horrors of war and were concerned by growing nationalism and fascism in their nation. The use of angles in the film, where those with power placed high, looming above those without it, seemed to signify the dominance of tyrannical systems over ordinary people. In 1922, the Piranha Film Company released its first and only picture, Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, directed by F.W. Murnau. Nosferatu tells a suspiciously familiar narrative, that of Count Orlok, played by the sinister Max Schreck. Piranha was sued by Bram Stoker's widow for this unauthorised, thinly veiled adaptation of Dracula, and courts ordered that all copies of the film be destroyed. However, as the film had already been distributed, a few copies managed to survive. The studio was forced to declare bankruptcy. In an atmosphere of rising anti-Semitism in post-war Germany, Orlok seemed to, whether intentionally or not, represent a crude caricature of a dangerous, quote-unquote, other, an unwelcome presence bringing death and disease. Back across the pond in the US, the 1920s brought the rise of the first horror superstar, the actor known as the Man of a Thousand Faces. Lon Chaney was born on April Fool's Day, 1883, in Colorado, to Frank and Emma Chaney. Both of Lon's parents were deaf. Despite this, they both worked in show business, and young Lon was bitten early by the theatre bug. Perhaps it was partially his parents' disability that contributed to Chaney's ability to so effectively convey emotion and meaning through his performances in silent cinema.
Yes, Lon Chaney was all of these. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the Miracle Man, the Phantom of the Opera. The world, fascinated and thrilled, called him the Man of a Thousand Faces.
Chaney is now best remembered for his mastery of makeup and his ability to change and distort his facial features and body. In The Penalty, 1920, he played the role of a double amputee, placing his legs into buckets and bending them back at the knees, causing immense pain. In 1923, Chaney played Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and in 1925, the Phantom in The Phantom of the Opera. In The Phantom of the Opera, we follow Christine, a young opera singer who is propelled to success when she is appointed understudy to the main singing sensation Carlotta. Meanwhile, the ballet dancers of the opera are scared by the rumour that a strange man is stalking about the building and possibly living beneath in the catacombs. Later, Carlotta receives a letter telling her that Christine must take her part as the opera's prima donna. She chooses to disregard the demand, with horrifying consequences. It's said that audience members fainted upon first seeing the Phantom's face. Chaney had several successful collaborations with director Todd Browning for Universal Studios, including The Unholy Three, The Unknown opposite a young Joan Crawford, and the now lost London After Midnight. When Universal acquired the rights for a certain vampiric novel by Irishman Bram Stoker, Browning had only one man in mind for the role of the Count. However, it was not to be. In 1929, Chaney was diagnosed with throat cancer. He would die a year later, aged 47. Of his 157 film performances, only a handful exist today, with the majority of his works having been lost, destroyed, or having deteriorated over the years. Chaney's untimely death paved the way for a new horror icon to rise, and in 1931, a new golden age of horror would begin. But that's a story for the next episode. Thanks for watching part 1 of my history of horror. If you enjoyed it, remember to like and subscribe and check out my other videos. They're pretty good, I think. What's your favourite early horror film? Let me know in the comments and see you again soon. Bye bye.